So I'm going to start this review with a question. And that question is, how the hell does, the mainstream game media review games of this type properly if they only get it 2 weeks in advance? If that's the case with this game, because I know a lot of games in general, they're worried about leaks and all that stuff, so they only get a couple of weeks to play, like a couple 100-hour game. And that's what this game was. This game was 140 hours by the time I was done. Did the main story, which is still incredibly lengthy by itself. It's probably at least 70 hours just doing the main goddamn story. But then doing, all the side quests, mini games, talking to all the NPCs too, right? So anyway, it's just a fascinating question. And, I'm glad I was able to spend all that time playing the game before I had to review it, because I was able to do it at my own pace and I wasn't pissed off that I have to, play this 140-hour, 70-hour game or whatever within 2 weeks and drop everything else in my life. So, this is the review for Trails of Cold Steel 4. Let's get into it. When it comes to graphics, the Legend of Heroes series in particular, graphics are very much, a secondary concern. You can't compare this series to, Final Fantasy VII Remake, for example, or some of the other AAA RPGs that are out there from Japan, because it will never measure up. This game's focus is on its characters, its world building, and its story. So that's where the focus is going to lie with this series, and rightly so, because it does a great job. But no, the graphics, they always serve their purpose. They look good. They can seem a little bit stiff sometimes depending on what's going on in the game, because they're more about providing functionality rather than being a focus. But that's not to say that there aren't beautiful graphics in this game. Some of the locations are very well done, especially some of the cities in this game. But in combat, the graphics really do shine, especially in some of the over-the-top attacks, particularly the S-crafts. They do a great job using the graphics to their fullest when it comes to these abilities in particular, and they always look super fucking cool, and they're really fun to watch. An area that this game really does shine, for at least myself personally, is the gameplay, because I can be a traditionalist sometimes when it comes to the RPG genre. I've always loved turn-based battle systems. I grew up with them. They'll always be near and dear to me. So I don't mind that type of battle system. And that's what it is in this RPG. It's a turn-based battle system, but it has been refined game after game in this series, and they continue to do so with the fourth game in the Cold Steel franchise. Combat is very fun. You're able to switch in and out characters very quickly, and the way buttons are allotted in the battle system, they're all to very specific menus for every character, so it's very quick to go to the item screen or the attack screen or the runaway screen or prompt very quickly and very seamlessly. So it makes battles, happen much, much faster. That, and you can combine it with the fast forward feature in this game, which is just an absolute godsend, especially if you're doing any backtracking. You don't have to just, just do your paces and run to the next area. You can fast forward it and you can just go there in a fucking blitz. And then also, there's fast travel in this game, and the loading times are almost non-existent as well. You can fast travel to locations extremely quickly, so you're not constantly waiting on loading screens at all. And I did play the first part of this game on the PS4, and it was really fast in terms of load times, on that system. And then I played the later half on the PS5 when I got it, and once again, it was, just as fast, if not faster, on that system too. And the characters that you use in these battles, they all feel very different from one another. Very rarely do any two characters have the same weapon. Every character very much has their own specific type of weapon that they're using in combat, and that is something that is consciously done by Falcom. I believe I read somewhere they pick the weapon for the character first, and then they build the character around the weapon, which is definitely an interesting concept and one that definitely seems to be working for them so far. So every character feels really unique in battle, and everyone's super fun to use, with at least a couple of characters also having, various forms of combat. Their weapons have more than one function, or they will switch between a couple of weapons, further enhancing their viability in combat, because some of them generally, they switch between having, a ranged weapon function or a close range weapon function, with range generally being able to hit multiple targets and close range being able to hit one with more attack damage. And this wouldn't be a JRPG if it didn't have minigames. And this game has an absolute ton of minigames. It has a fishing minigame. It has a pom-pom minigame, which is essentially Tetris. It has Vantage Masters, which is like, a combat card game. Think like a Gwent from The Witcher, or Triple Triad from Final Fantasy, along those lines. And then you also got, casinos. So you have, I believe it was poker, and they have blackjack. And then there's other ones I just can't even remember off the top of my head. So it's very classic JRPG in the fact like it's got a ton of side activities for you to do. And I enjoyed most of them by and large. I didn't play a ton of the card game, but I did, caught all the fish in the game, beat all the opponents you could play, the Tetris game against and stuff. So I sunk a ton of hours in the mini games, and it further enhances the game because you can just like, oh man, I'm kind of bored of combat or talking to NPCs. Let's go challenge some people to some Tetris, or like, let's go fishing. So it's always great to have those options to shake up the game and, keep it feeling fresh. And in terms of level design, there's nothing really, groundbreaking in the Legend of Heroes series. Dungeons are, pretty basic for the most part, with some twists and turns and some mechanisms that you need to activate and stuff like that. But there's nothing that's going to win any awards for level design in these games, which is fine. They're very much like functional. They're enjoyable. They're linear for the most part. But it's just not something that you're going to find in this series. So it is worth mentioning. And because the Cold Steel series of games is so focused on the story, there's a lot of dialogue in these games, like a lot of dialogue. But that's a good thing, in my opinion anyway, because you get more world building, you get more time spent with these characters, and it's like the little touches that really help flesh out the characters. For example, in the battle system, you have combat linking where, you have 4 party members in your party, and, you have 2 pairs, obviously they can pair off with each other, and you can switch between characters who pairs with who. And if you finish off battle with a pair attack, you'll have, dialogue between the characters after every battle. And every character has dialogue with every other character, no matter who you pair them up with. So it's like the little touches like that that really flesh out the characters in these games. And then that's not to mention, there's character banter happening out in the field when you're just running around, and you have people, maybe talking about the larger plot points in the game, or they'll just like, be having banter with one another and teasing one another, or just not getting along and arguing with one another. So it just, once again, it's just all of these little moments and these little touches are just really enhancing the gameplay in terms of getting to know the characters. And then with your main character, Rean, in this game, you have the ability to spend bonding points at certain points of the game where you can, spend a bit more time with a certain character. And generally, you're getting more lore about the character. You're learning more about them, their backstory, what motivates them, what makes them tick. And all this serves to do is just make you more invested in their well-being and care about the characters more. Which is important for a game that, that places so much emphasis on it. Because when something happens to these characters in the story, at least for myself personally, holy fuck, I am super invested in what's happening to them at the moment. I care about their physical and mental well-being. So Falcom is definitely one of the masters of the industry when it comes to just making you care about the characters that you're playing as. And the crazy thing is with this game, the random NPCs in this world, some of them get more attention and dialogue and build up than some main characters in, other RPG franchises. Because when you're done main story beats, and the thing that Cold Steel 4 does very well is in your fast travel menu, you will get an icon indicating that, there's new dialogue for characters in a certain area. So you can go there and talk to them, and their little sub-stories, they'll progress, whether it's, people being conscripted for war and, how it's affecting their family and their kids, or, you have like an upper class noble girl and a lower class, male commoner running away together, and, their families are hunting them because they don't condone their relationship. And you get little stories like that peppered all throughout the game in all the different cities you can visit. And it just makes it super rewarding to go and talk to a lot of these people, because you're like, oh man, I wonder how they're making out with that story. It's like, did that couple hook up? Or, oh man, did that guy get drafted into the war? And how did this kid handle it? And stuff like that. So it's just, I love this series because it just makes the world feel like it's actually living when the same NPCs just aren't repeating the same thing over and over again. And that's why these games take so long to be translated, because it's got, millions and millions of characters to translate because of all this NPC dialogue. But if you spend the time and you like talking to all the NPCs like I do, it's incredibly rewarding. But you don't have to do it if you don't want to. And you'll probably save yourself, a good 10 hours from the game, or probably more if you don't. So like I've said before in my other videos, and I've probably said it already in this video, the story is really where Cold Steel 4 shines. That and its characters. And one thing it really tries to do is it gives you, a bit of a story synopsis before the game starts over the last 3 Cold Steel games. But unfortunately for a series that's, so lore heavy and, story heavy, that has, sequential games and, obviously all these events are related to each other because we're in the same world for all these games, the bar of entry is incredibly high, like extremely high. I would almost, if you were just some guy on the street and you were just like, oh yeah, I'm going to play Cold Steel 4 and I haven't played any of the other 3 games or whatever, I would do everything in my power to stop you. This is a series that you need to play the games in order. As at the bare minimum, Cold Steel 1, 2, 3, then 4. If not playing the other 2 sub-series, which is where I recommend you start. Because if you don't, you're all these super exciting and rewarding moments with character appearances or references and all that cool shit that I love, you're not going to get any of that. You're really not. And as much as I want more people to play this series, I want them to enjoy it at their fullest and do it right. So I would almost say, like, if you're not going to play, from the beginning of Cold Steel at the very least, if not the other series, I would say don't even bother. Which is really sad to say, but that is, just the case with this game. It's like if you're reading, the Lord of the Rings books, you're not going to start with Two Towers or Return of the King and have no idea what's going on. It's very much the same thing in this case. But is it worth, the high bar of entry? Is it worth it to get in this series? Once again, as I've said in my other Cold Steel videos and my Legend of Heroes videos, abso-fucking-lutely. Because if you do, enter the series, at least at the very beginning of the Trails in the Sky series, and you make it all the way to this one, this game rewards you immediately for being a hardcore fan or a long-term fan. As soon as the game starts, you are rewarded for it. And I can't go into details for it, but essentially they're pretty much holding you down, and they're just, shoveling in fan service in your mouth. Like you're just overwhelmed with the amount of fan service you're being fed at the very onset of this game. And it has moments like that throughout the game where it is just pure fan service. And all 40 characters in this game are very well developed, especially if you've played the last 3 games as well. Of course, some are stronger than others, like obviously certain characters are going to get more screen time than others, but by and large, what, all the characters are about, and, they have very unique personalities, and how they tick. So, they get absolute props for doing that for this many characters. They've definitely spent the time doing it. The game is definitely a slow burn though. Don't get me wrong. You need to, have a significant amount of time invested in these games generally, even if you are just playing the main story, because the main story generally, it'll kind of flow along a bit. It's kind of like, I wouldn't say light on story, but it's just there's not as much happening sometimes. But when the other shoe drops and we get these these big story moments happening, they are fucking epic to behold, and they are super rewarding. But no game's perfect, and there are things that you could criticize this game's story for, absolutely. One thing that kind of got to me a little bit, and this is very common in a lot of Japanese media, especially like anime or JRPGs or whatever, is the main protagonist has a lot of love interests or a lot of ladies he can pick from generally, which is fine. I've experienced the harem thing before or whatever, but they really went all out in it for this game in particular, and especially the Cold Steel series of games in general. But man, is the main protagonist dense. Holy shit, he is just so dense when it comes to the ladies. It is almost frustrating. Actually, scratch that, it is a little frustrating. But it's not something that ruined my enjoyment of the game. It was just one of those things. It's just like, oh God, of course this guy doesn't have a clue or whatever. And it's another thing that was, a bit of a point of criticism for this game that I did hear about was there are some, story beats that are not fully addressed or addressed as much as some of the fans wanted. But, in the meantime, there has been another game released for this series already in Japan. We're waiting on an official localization announcement still. that covers these story beats that weren't fully addressed in Cold Steel 4. So that's, it's not really a gripe of mine. It's like, oh, I know this wasn't covered very well in this game, for example, but I know it's going to be covered well in the next game. So I really can't have that complaint because I know that game is incoming. It's going to fill a bunch of holes. It's going to set the foundation for the next arc of the story. So I can forgive this game a bit more for maybe not having those certain story beats that I might have been expecting. But even without maybe those other story beats not being fully addressed, the game is still incredibly satisfying by itself, and it has a very satisfying conclusion that wraps up, by and large, everything that the Cold Steel series of games brought up that was, pertinent to this sub-series. And yes, it raised, more questions, like a lot of mysteries were revealed or solved, but holy crap, a lot of new mysteries were teased as well. And there's, things for fans to speculate and debate about for years to come now too, which is great because, this is an ongoing series. It's only like 60% done, 55% done. So, and it's been going on 10 plus years. So like we got a ton of fucking games left still. But the thing with the series going forward is, up until this point, it's been very, focused on specific countries. It's been a much more narrower focus, whereas going forward, we're going to be getting much more of a world focus and solving the world's mysteries, which is cool. I do enjoy a narrower focus a lot of the time, but, there's just so many world mysteries being brought forward now in the series that I would like some answers to those questions. And the last thing I want to talk about in terms of this game's story, it's something I haven't really seen before in an RPG or in games in general. And that is, the effect conscription or a draft can have on, a society, which is really fascinating to me in this game. So, throughout the game, that there's a military draft going on essentially, people are being conscripted, all the young men. And it's fascinating, seeing the effect it had on all these different families and how, children and spouses and grandparents and, siblings are dealing with family members being drafted into the military. And you get wildly different responses to the draft, based off story reasons I won't get into, but, a lot of people are super gung-ho about it and a lot of people are fucking terrified about it, which is probably what would happen if there was a draft now, depending on the circumstances, right? So it just had this... There was just kind of like this, this bit of foreboding all the time when it came to the story's mood, right? Especially when you would do the rounds and talk to all the game's NPCs, because the draft's going on and everyone's really struggling with it and they don't want their family members to get killed and everyone's really scared. It was just, it was very refreshing and something I hadn't really experienced before. And I feel by and large, Falcom did a really good job with it. For the game's sounds now, did Falcom do a good job with the game's sound? Because generally they do a pretty good job with, their soundtracks for their games, whether it's Legend of Heroes or Ys. And yes, they did another good fucking job with their soundtrack again. Absolutely. Especially when it came to the game's battle tracks. There was at least one point where I stopped and I was just freaking jamming out to the battle track as it was playing. Even, gives fan service in terms of the soundtrack because it brings back old tracks from games from like 8-9 years ago and it remasters them for this game. And there's even jukeboxes, throughout the game and certain ends and stuff where you can put like, $10 into and it will play you a song from one of the older games in the series. So just, fan service everywhere with the old songs they decided to include. And then the new ones they conducted for this series, they did an excellent fucking job again. The English voice acting for this series, by and large, it's been fucking excellent. And it's still excellent in this game. They spent the money on some decent voice actors and it didn't cringe a single time listening to the voice track for a JRPG, no less. So, that's something super rare and something that should be acknowledged. The voice actors killed it. Especially for the one character, Eustace, in this game. He had some very emotional scenes, obviously because of some story beats that he was involved with, but holy fuck, that voice actor absolutely nailed his scenes. So, kudos to you, buddy. So by and large, music and voice acting in Cold Steel 4, excellent. So in conclusion, the conclusion of Cold Steel 4 did a great job. Yes, it has its problems. Yes, it's a turn-based RPG. Yes, maybe some of its systems aren't as advanced as, certain other RPG genres. But where its focus lies is its characters and its story and its world building. And it does an excellent job in this game. It wraps up all the mysteries it needs to. It opens the door for new ones. And the ones that weren't addressed in this game, they're going to be pretty much concluded in the next game, from what my understanding is. So no, Cold Steel 4, excellent game. Just don't start with this game. Go start with Cold Steel 1 first if you have to. And if I can make a recommendation, go all the way back to Trails in the Sky and start with those games, because it'll just be infinitely more rewarding for you once you get to these games. All right. Anyway, this is my review for Cold Steel 4. Excellent game. Check it out. Thanks for joining me for this Game Rig, guys. Take it easy.